There is no doubt Combat Masters is one of the most popular free-to-play casual shooters out there right now on Steam, especially if you want to have like a AAA Call of Duty style experience on a low-end potato PC. This is hands down the game for you. I know personally a lot of you guys playing the game right now, so in this video I'm gonna bring you guys the ultimate FPS boost guide for Combat Masters, the best graphical settings that you can do in the game to improve overall performance, reduce latency, especially if you are playing the game on a low-end potato PC or laptop. You guys know whenever I made a tutorial, I always test these games out on my low-end laptop and show you guys the exact result on real time, and at the end I will show you guys the best settings that you should do to improve your performance and frame rate, and that you can apply on your low-end PC or laptop. So without wasting any time, let's get right into it. Alright, the system that I've been testing out the game today is a pretty old laptop that I had, which is about like 7 years old at this point, and it comes with the i5 7200U, which is basically a dual core CPU and 8 gigs of RAM and Intel HD 620 graphics. And thankfully our game Combat Masters is a pretty well optimized title for low-end PCs, and also comes with a pretty hefty amount of settings that you can change in game to improve performance, which definitely comes in handy later. And also I'm gonna record the real-time gameplay using my phone because of two main reasons. First one, I don't have a capture card right now, and second one is the CPU on this laptop is pretty low end. It's basically a dual core CPU. I could use something like OBS to record the gameplay, but it does take a hit on performance, so you won't be able to see the real performance when you're playing the game. So using my phone to record the gameplay is much more ideal, but I know the footage doesn't really look that good. But keep your eye on the frame rate and the frame time graph, which help you to get a better understanding on performance. Alright, when you launch the game for the first time, the game lets you play with the default settings that the game suggests is kind of like the high to ultra settings on this low-end GPU, and that is on the default 1080p resolution as well. And this is kind of crazy and quite demanding on this low-end Intel HD graphics card, but it's fun to see how the game actually performs. So I just played one game and I was basically getting around 30 to 50 FPS most of the time, and it just dropped heavily. Frame time graph is all over the place. There's a lot of stutters, lags, and FPS drops. It's incredibly hard to aim, especially in this type of a fast-paced first-person shooter. You need at least 60 FPS to get an actual playable experience. And the next thing I did was basically set everything to low and disable any unnecessary features, and also disabling stuff like anti-aliasing, post-processing, and lighting. But I still kept the native 1920 by 1080 resolution, and with that I was able to get around 50 to 60 FPS basically every single time. Definitely a very much playable experience on 1080p, so I was quite impressed that I actually able to play the game on native resolution. But our frame time graph is still quite all over the place, even though our average frame time is bit improved. And the next thing that we can easily do is drop the resolution to something like 720p, especially if you're just playing on a pretty old laptop screen. 720p is ideal, and when you run the game on 720p, the game is absolutely buttery smooth right now. We can basically get around 80 to 100 FPS all the time in these smaller maps. Yes, visually the game doesn't look that good, especially when it comes to textures, everything set to low, but the overall performance in the game is extremely smooth, especially considering we are running the game on a pretty low-end Intel HD graphics. And also our frame time graph is much more stable now, and we're also getting pretty acceptable average frame times. So if you're someone who's running the game on this type of a low-end laptop, dropping the resolution to something like 720p is absolutely the way to go, and this gives you a much more smooth experience, at least on the multiplayer game modes. But when it comes to the Battle Royale mode, things are a bit different. It's a very large map with a lot of structures and buildings, so the frame rates tend to drop even more. When you play the game on low 720p, you'll be getting around average 40 FPS, but the frame rate is dropping a lot of the time depending on the situation. But on the smaller scale multiplayer maps, the game just runs buttery smooth. Alright, now I'm going to show you guys the best graphical settings that you change in the game right now, and all the settings that I test throughout this video. First, go to the settings and the graphic option, and first we got the render quality. Make sure to set it to low in order to get the maximum performance. Next up we got the particle effects. We don't really need that, make sure to turn that off. And next up we got decal. Some people tend to turn that on, but I just like to turn everything off. I don't really see that it gives you any advantage when you're playing the game, so just make sure to turn that off. And also blood decals and explosion decals, make sure to turn both of them off as well. Next up we got 3 post-processing options. We don't really need to turn that on because it's quite demanding on the GPU side, so make sure to turn everything off as well. Alright, next up we got the lobby light and lobby shadows, and this setting does not affect when you're playing the game, when you're playing a match. It's only effect when you're in the lobby, so if you want your game to look good, set it to high or just otherwise set it to low. It doesn't really matter. And next up we got the battle light and battle shadows. Make sure to set both of these settings to low, and this will help you to improve your performance dramatically, especially when you are in the game. Next up we got fog. We don't really need that. Make sure to turn that off. Next up we got lobby textures. You can set it to high or ultra if you want your game to look good. Otherwise just set it to low. It doesn't really impact when you're in a real match. But next up we got battle textures. This is a very important setting, so if you are in such a low-end system like an Intel HD graphics, I would recommend you guys to set this one to low. But if you are playing the game with a low-end dedicated graphic card, something like a GTX 750, GTX 660 or something like that, you can set it to high or ultra. You can test around with the settings. But if you only consider about getting more frame rate, just make sure to set it to low as well. Next up we got 3 anti-aliasing options. We don't really need that. It's quite stress on our GPU. Just make sure to turn everything off. Alright, next up we got a section called 3D geometry details, and these settings are basically effect on the large scale battle royale mode. So if you're playing on a pretty low end GPU, we are already struggling to play the battle royale mode with the higher frame rate, so make sure to set everything to low and disable. And there is an option called minimap streaming. You can set it to off. It doesn't really take away your minimap when you play in the battle royale mode. It just reduces the details that it shows. So if you're in a low end GPU like Intel HD graphics, just make sure to set it to off. Alright, next up we got a bunch of settings about view distance, and I think these are basically effect mainly on the battle royale mode as well. So if you're on a low end GPU like this, just make sure to set everything to low. And next up we got field of view. This is basically a personal preference. I usually play the game on highest field of view that I can get, especially on this type of fast-paced first-person shooter. It doesn't really impact the performance, so you can basically set it to 100 as well. When it comes to field of view hands, I'm not the biggest fan of that feature. I don't really like my hands floating around my screen, so I'm personally playing with 60 or 70, but if you want, you can easily set it to the max settings. It doesn't really impact the performance. Next up we got ragdoll animations. Just make sure to turn that off, especially if you're on such a low-end system like this. It helps you to reduce the CPU usage a little bit, so make sure to turn that off. Next up we got V-Syncs. We don't really need that on a multiplayer game like this, so make sure to turn that off to get the maximum frame rate. And finally we got the display resolution, and as I previously mentioned guys, if you're playing with Intel HD graphics, I would recommend you guys to drop your resolution to something like 720p, and if you want more frame rate, you can go even more below that, something like 480p, but I don't really recommend that. The game looks much more blurrier, so just set it to 1280 by 720p if you're on a low-end GPU like this. And that is basically all the settings that I changed in this video, and I don't really see the point that we have to go to the config file and change anything else, because the game already provides tons of different options that you can change in the game. And I would say, especially on a low-end GPU like Intel HD 620, the performance on 720p looks pretty good, at least on the multiplayer game mode. And hopefully these settings will help you to get a better performance, better frame rate on your low-end system. And if you got any question, definitely go ahead and drop a comment down below as well. And as always guys, if you enjoyed the content so far, don't forget to like this video and also subscribe and stay tuned to the channel. I'll catch you guys soon in the next video. Stay safe.